Okay, we are a small but hopefully vocal crowd tonight. So if you have your Bibles, if you want to open up to 1 Samuel 16 is where we'll start off at tonight. Is it up there, Matt? I even wore my glasses, Matt, and I still couldn't see it. But all right, 1 Samuel 16. So when we talked through this last night, in the first half of this chapter, this is when David was anointed. And recall he's anointed in front of his brothers. They are all there. And we talked about a couple things with this. Who did Samuel think he was there to anoint? Eliab, or anybody else but David, right? And who did Jesse think that Samuel was there to see? Anybody but David, right? So David is just totally an afterthought. Like, it gets to the point where God tells Samuel, it's not this one, it's not this one, it's not this one. And finally Samuel's like, do you got anybody else? And he's like, oh yeah, I got this kid out watching the flock, right? And so that's when it comes in, and that's the anointing that goes on there. I think a thread of that story will show up in chapter 17 here as well tonight in our study. So when you get to the end of this chapter, and I think this is kind of an important piece to play in here, starting in verse 14, and if someone could read 14 through 19 for us tonight of chapter 16. John, thank you. All right, thanks, John. Okay, so he's anointed, right? There's who knows how much time frame passes in here, and then there's the Spirit of the Lord leaves Saul. Saul's now tormented, and you have David now coming into the picture. And I say all that is if you've read chapter 17, what's one of the things Saul says at the end of the battle with Goliath? Yeah, who's that? So you can look at this a couple different ways. Salyers, I wish Jason was here so he could hear me give him credit for this, but Salyers and I had this conversation. You can read this and say there's some time issues, some chronological challenges in the text, or you can read this and say whenever Saul is tormented by the Spirit, he really doesn't know what's going on too well. So he's only seeing David when he's tormented by the Spirit, so he really doesn't have this idea of who's there. I'm not sure what's going on. It doesn't really matter in the big picture of the story. But he's at least familiar with David, though he's not going to really seem to know who he is too much when we get into chapter 17 here. But David comes, if you get down to verse 23, so it came about whenever the evil spirit from God came to Saul, David would take the harp and play it with his hand, and Saul would be refreshed and well, and the evil spirit would depart from him. So he's in this service, right? He is there. And he is working for Saul. And then you get to chapter 17 in Goliath's challenge. All right, this has got to be probably the most well-known story of David for anybody who's been around any Bible classes as a child and on through. But someone give me the synopsis of this story. Sean? starting to get into my lesson a little bit, Sean. Just the synopsis, all right? Okay, so he shows up. The period of time is 40 days. When you look over in verse 16. 40 days, twice a day. This is what I'm going to greet you with every morning, is this behemoth showing up and shouting out these curses and making fun of them, and then to make sure you have sweet dreams each night. I'm going to say this one more time, so it's the last thing you think about when you go off to bed. So for 40 days, this goes on. And so to Sean's point, all right, so Goliath is this giant. I do like this representation, right? So you do have a valley between them. You got this hill or this mountain on one side. All the Philistines are there. Goliath would come down to the valley there, and he'd say, come out and fight me. And then you got us on the other side. We're just sitting here watching, right? And we don't come down to fight him. And that's what's going on. Just think about the repetitiveness of this. Now, I believe God obviously God is very much in control of this to draw this out for this time frame. He's building up for this moment. But you can just imagine this every single day that he's coming out doing this twice a day. They probably had the spiel pretty well memorized by the 10th day of this. So he would come out. He makes fun of them. What's the size of this dude? Yeah, does anybody know what a cubit is?
18 inches.
Roughly 18 inches. They would take the forearm, elbow to the end, sometimes to the finger. That's roughly it. Something like that, real precise measure. All I'm going to say is the dude was tall, and he was scary. His spear is the size of a weaver's beam. Ironically, as a weaver, I have no idea what that means, but it's surprisingly big, apparently. And then secondly, it was enough that when he does come out, everybody goes the other way, right? No one goes out and goes, oh, I can take this dude. Everybody just kind of hides, right? So you have all this building up to all this going on here. And so, and it also says at the end of verse 7, he's got a shield carrier who walked before him, right? I don't know what a shekel is either, but his spear had a head on it that was 600 shekels of iron. And so this guy is well armored, very large, and we'll learn later on in the conversation with Saul that he's been a warrior since his youth. This is all he has known, right? He's skilled in this ability. And so this is the piece that goes on and on. Where's Saul at in this story? Wayne? In his tent, exactly where the king should be, right? That's sarcasm. Okay. You guys know the story of Saul too? Where was Saul when he was supposed to be anointed king? Hiding again in the baggage this time, right? This time, as the king, he's not the one that's out front. What is Saul offering to everybody? Pretty hefty award, right? You don't have to pay taxes. Your family will be exempt from the taxes, which are a little bit hefty. You get some other great benefits there. He's going to award you different things. And so he's basically begging for someone. He's wanting to pay anybody who's willing to go out and do this. And I think this is part of the context that you need to have, too, to understand why it is that the shepherd boy shows up and Saul's like, go for it. Because, again, the time frame that it's been going on, no one's taking him up on it. And I think he's out of options, right? Now, I know this is a little bit of speculation. What should have Saul been doing? Yeah, he should have dealt with it. He should have been leading the charge, right, Elliot? Yeah. Right.
What do you want me to do here? And especially as a king, you have probably pretty reasonable certainty that a prophet might show up and tell you what to do.
Yes.
Kind of seems like it's the whole point there.
Now, remember, too, in the beginning of this, as you look back through this, right, that in chapter 15, Samuel's already told him the kingdom's been taken away from you. So I don't know if part of this is just Saul giving up, right? Like, it's already done. I'm just going to stay here. And again, I'm speculating. But clearly, as the leader and as the person who is the king, he's not where he should be. He's hiding, right? And again, a pattern that we see with Saul. So, how would you describe Saul in this story? Weak. Any other words come to mind? I was going to go for fearful, but that'll work too. All right. Definitely afraid of what is going on, right? In some context, because he's not out there. And so you get to this piece, right? And as Sean gave us the synopsis, I do want to jump over to the text here again. In verse 12, we're introduced to David again. And so Jesse sends David to go check on his brothers, see what's going on. And so he takes all the stuff and goes there. And you get down to, in verse 20, he shows up just at the time that Goliath is coming out. And he hears what's going on. And he says in verse 23, in verse 23 is when he comes out. And then you get into verse 24, everybody flees when they see the man. And then, and surely he's coming up to defy Israel. And then you get into the piece, and it will be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel, right? So here's the rewards that you're going to get. All right, so can someone read 26 down through 30, please? Matt.
David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, "What will be done to this man who kills his Philistine?" Wait, did you want 17?
No, 26 down. Oh, yeah, chapter 17, I'm sorry. 26 down through 30.
What will be done for the man who kills his Philistine and takes away the reproach of Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? People answered him in accord with this word, saying, "Thus it will be done for the man who kills him." Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger burned against David, and he said, "Why do you prevail? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the battle." But David said, "What have I done now? Was it not just a question?" And he turned away from him to another and said the same thing. The people answered the same thing before.
I think verse 29 is probably the best little brother response ever. What have I done now? So you get this point now. David comes in. He hears everything right. He sees what's going on. Look at how he phrases the question, though, in verse 26. What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach of Israel? Just think about that piece of that. It's not, he doesn't say, what will happen to the man who goes out and tries to fight him? Or what will happen to the man who happens to go out there and gives it his best shot, right? He's like, what will happen to the man who kills him? So there's this piece, the story, right, is the title of it is about being a brave heart, but I want you to think of it more in the context of confidence. And Sean alluded to this, and we'll talk about this more too, and where David's confidence is, but it's the confidence in the statements that he's making. I do not view those as arrogant. We can talk about that fine line there. But I see the confidence in David, though, as he goes through this piece, as he's asking these questions, and as he's sizing things up here and looking at what is going to go on next. So, Sean? Yeah. Yeah, and that's an interesting one, too, because it's the 450 prophets and all the people. He's totally fine and very confident. And then one very evil queen makes one statement about him and sort of ruins everything for quite a while. But he turns to God, right? So that's definitely an interesting piece there, too. Any other thoughts on this? You guys are going to have to talk a whole lot more. We're going to be done 20 minutes early.
I was just going to say, it's interesting even how Goliath is phrasing this as he's making his challenge and how it's described afterward.
it's just interesting, right? Like
Yeah.
when it's army against army and you're supposed to clash at the battle line, there's the sense of, okay, we can do this together, but the Goliath stepping out in front is very intimidating for everyone, but David has this perspective like we're talking about. It's just interesting to see there's obviously other warriors that would still kill them if they got near them and they didn't put up a fight, but Goliath is just this stark relief of this is like what really is threatening in their eyes, and it's dialed up to 11.
Right. Right. Whole new level with it. Agreed. I was about ready to call on you, Tracy. All right. So I want to jump in the text here down to starting at verse 31, and I want to talk a little bit about how David is viewing Goliath. So if someone could read 31, let's go down through 30 or 40, please. Tammy, thanks. Yeah, please.
Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail me because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it, struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the Most High. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he did not test the men. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine.
All right. Thanks, Tammy. Okay. There's a song about David showing up to a sword fight with a rock, kind of thing, right? So in the vernacular of that. So you get this picture that he's going out against a guy who's got this giant spear. The idea of a spear is that you kill the person before they get to you, right? You throw the spear, so that's one component of this. It's a challenge for him. He's got a shield bearer in front of him, and so he's got some protection already with him, and not to mention the fact that Goliath has done this since his youth, right? So what does that tell you about Saul? What is Saul looking at in all of this? Wayne?
He's got nothing to lose. If David kills Goliath, he's good. If Goliath kills David,
Yeah,
big deal.
right. He's out of, maybe he doesn't realize he's the harpist yet. So he is out of that component of it. He loses a daughter and some tax revenue, but other than that, he's got nothing much to lose. But how is Saul viewing Goliath? And compare that to how David describes him. Totally physically, which is the problem, right? This is exactly what Tyler was just getting at. Looking at this thing, and he's not 11 foot, but he's an 11 on the scale, right? He's off the charts in this thing. And that's what everybody keeps looking at. And David keeps looking at him like what?
We assume that David sees Goliath and he has absolutely no fear. Yet that thing or the lion or bear that you face is coming after you. You're going to have a little fear.
Yeah.
It's absolutely normal. But he viewed Goliath as smaller than God. This is the important thing.
That's right. So that is a good point, too, that Matt brings up. This isn't about being afraid, all right? So do not confuse confidence with fearlessness. Those aren't synonyms, right? That's not how that works. Confidence means you go forward anyway, and that you're going to do what you need to do, and you're going to serve the way you need to serve in this case. But you're still going to go. You can still be afraid, but you're still going to go. Tyler, you bidding? I'm not sure.
Sorry.
Okay.
I was trying to find the verse while I was also raising my hand, so that was where my problem was. I think it's, I don't know, I think it's so funny that David talks about the lion and the bear as I grabbed him by the beard,
Yes.
but I also think that's like, I don't know, we talk about how when you look at your past and see what God has done for you, it gives you confidence to take the next step of faith,
That's right.
even when you don't know what the outcomes look like. And it's almost like David's projecting, God helped me take over these huge animals in my past. And yes, this is a man, but I mean, I grabbed them by their fur or their mane and I took them down. I'm going to grab this guy by his beard, right? Again,
Yeah.
not from the cocky confidence, but it's God.
Yep.
And so I don't know, him describing it there as a beard, at least in the English Standard, it just catches my eye every time I read it.
Yes.
Thank you.
And
verse 35.
yeah, and again, this is the whole context, right? Those animals are bred to be predators, right? They know nothing else but to seek prey, to fight, just similar to Goliath. Yeah, Dwayne.
I've always thought that David here was looking around at everyone around him and thinking, why do you see this as an insurmountable problem? Right? We serve the living God. And you also think that he's, I don't know if angry is the right word, or upset, or motivated by those things to say, you've allowed, all these people around me have allowed this Philistine to make us approach before the living God. And he has taken care of me every time, every place. He's going to take care of me again, and I'm not going to allow this.
Right.
Pretty gross. I'm just not going to do it. That's me.
Right. Agreed. And so he works through this, right? He goes out. What's he go out there with? You guys all know the song. Are we singing that one this week? Okay. Anybody? Yep. Slingshot and 5 stones. All right. How many stones does he need? Just one. All right. And so he goes out. I thought it would be really cool to like reenact that kind of thing and try to throw someone out there, but knowing my luck, I'd break a TV. And so, but this idea, right, that he goes out there against this giant with something that God made in the brook, a stone, and with the confidence of God behind him and everything that God has put before him to build him up to this moment. And he goes out and he puts it on and he slings that stone. And what happens to Goliath? He's got a really bad headache at the very least, but he's not moving. All right, and then what's David do? Well, he cuts off his head with what? Okay, as a warrior, what does that mean? Yeah. There's a couple definitive statements there, but as a warrior, when you lose your sword, that is like shameful, right? There's this idea that there's nothing good about that. They're not going to sing any songs about Goliath, all right? And so he's killed with his own sword. There's a point about that to be made, right? And they do this. I'm kind of skipping over because of time. The smack talk between them is kind of funny. And the interesting thing, if you've ever had the joy of watching two males fight and the smack talk that goes on, there's a little bit of banter here. And so it's just kind of funny. And so David moves quickly, slings one stone, strikes him in the forehead. In verse 49, he falls to the ground and he prevails over the Philistine and he killed him. No sword, so he runs up and he takes the Philistine's sword and he kills him, cuts off his head. And then what do the Philistines do when they see that? They ran. Now, there's a huge amount of symbolism with this. I like how Tyler brought this up already, right? They all had swords and spears and shields as well. And most of them are trained soldiers as well. But I think they understood the implication, right, of what has happened here. That the guy who was supposed to win the war for them in this quick, easy battle is dead by a shepherd boy with a sling. And I think they understand the greater powers that are going on. Tyler, then Ellie.
I forget the citation, but I believe it's in the Psalms or even in Deuteronomy with Moses where God promises that one of you will put to flight 1,000. And that kind of gives me this sense of what's happening here with David. It's that implication of, is this what the littlest person of the Israelites can do here when they're putting their trust in God? And now they have the confidence to do it. I mean,
Yeah.
It's what David says, is God doesn't save by the sword or the spear. It's by God who's doing the saving.
Right. Exactly right. That's a great point. And so the history is already there and established too, right? They've seen this God rise up for his people before here too. So they take off. They go the other direction. The battle is over, per se, as the slaughter begins, really. All right. So I want to jump into a couple things here, and I am going to run out of time. But if someone could turn over to 1 Samuel 21. I just want to talk about this piece of this. 1 Samuel 21, and someone read 10 through 15 for us. Drew, thanks.
Then David rose and fled that day from Saul, and Achish the king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David the king of the land? Did they not sing of this as they began saying, Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s? David took these words to heart and greatly feared Achish the king of Gath. So he disguised his sanity before them and acted insanely in their hands and scribbled on the doors of the gate and let his saliva run down his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, Behold, you see the man behaving as a madman? Why are you drinking the meat? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this one to act a madman in my presence and shut this one from my house?
Okay. So does David always act bravely? No. How many Psalms are written about the battle with Goliath? Good answer, none. So, turn over to Psalm 34, just real quick. Does anybody have the headers in their Bible? What's it say, Tyler, in yours?
Of David when he changed his behavior before Abimelech so that he drove him out and he went away.
Okay. In New American Standard, feigned madness is what it has instead of changed behavior. All right, and I bring this up in this context when we talk about a man after God's own heart. Here's a guy who, in all confidence in the Lord, goes and stands before a true physical giant, understanding that the Lord is going to deliver him, and he does exactly what he needs to do, and God delivers him. He gets weary, though. If you look at the whole context of the amount of times that Saul is chasing him, pursuing him, relentlessly going after him, the close encounters that have occurred here, and he thinks to himself, I'm just going to have to go over to the enemy's side over here, and I'll hide over there because Saul's too afraid to go after them. And then he becomes fearful of Achish, which is interesting to me in the context of if God just delivered him here, do you not think he would have delivered him there? And actually, if you take the time to read this psalm, that's exactly what David says. And I wish we had a little more time to delve into this, but I want to move forward a little bit. But that's the point of this. The other one that I'll give to you too is Peter will reference this psalm as well in 1 Peter. And I think, again, it's this idea of when both of these men were weak at a time when they failed to serve the Lord or keep their confidence in the Lord and they fell away. And both of them come back to the same thing. And I imagine in Peter, after the denial and then truly seeing the resurrected Christ and his ascension, coming back to this psalm and thinking about that again. And that's what he's referencing and encouraging us in 1 Peter. So it's a powerful psalm. And it's a powerful in the context of what goes on. And again, I want you to think about this in the big picture of things with David. Never wrote a psalm about Goliath, right? That didn't happen. But when he failed, he went right back to the Lord and he wrote a psalm about that. And he shared it with us, kept it for us. So thoughts on that before I switch gears? Okay. All right. So when you think about our Savior, do you think about Jesus as being brave? Agreed. Absolutely. All right. Tell me about some ways that you think of him as being brave. What are some of the stories that come to mind? Gary? definitely schools them. And John chapter 7 is several pieces on this, right? They're looking to kill him. He still goes up to the festival, and he still teaches publicly, and he's still teaching about the who he is and what he's coming to fulfill and the power of the Lord. Any other thoughts? Tyler?
Just a couple of references where it talks about him setting his face resolutely toward Jerusalem, and he knows what's going to happen, and he knows the pain and suffering and what's going to play out there, but he's determined to go, even though he knows it's not going to be a pleasant thing. He knows the purpose, and he pursues it.
Yeah. So that's an excellent one. I was going to go to that one later, but we'll go there now. I'm not speculating on his prayer in the garden in Matthew 26. I'm not even foolish enough to go down that road, so don't take this the wrong way. But he asked for the cup to pass. He asked for the cup to pass a couple times in those prayers, praying so intently that his sweat's like drops of blood. He's in great anguish around what is coming because he knows what is coming. But what does he do? Say it louder, Lynn. Right. He does it, right? He goes out in the confidence in his God, our God, in the confidence in his Father, our Father. He goes out and he does it. He faces the men that come out to arrest him. He confronts them. He pleads for his own people, his disciples, and says, these have done nothing wrong. You just take me. And he goes and stands before the Sadducees and the Pharisees in this fake little trial, and he stays in line with that, and he does what he's supposed to do. And again, the confidence in the Lord, and in this case, knowing very well, exactly as Tyler said, what is going to happen and what is going to go on. The other example that I thought of too is just the idea of at least the two events that we know of where he goes in and cleans out the temple. This idea of purging it, of cleaning it out, of getting rid of everybody in there and driving them out as well. And then standing up to them when they challenge him as to why are you doing this and by what authority. And he says, destroy this temple and I'll raise it up in 3 days. Right? And so he challenges them as well. All right, so then it comes down to this in our last 5 minutes here together. All right, how are you going to be brave? No bear wrestling, no lion tackling. Just how are you going to be brave, Wayne?
I don't know if it's being brave, and I don't know if you say Jesus is brave. He had a goal, and he didn't care what happened on earth. He had to make that goal. And we have to do the same thing. We have a goal, and that is to get to heaven. And we have to do whatever is necessary to get there. And if some abuse comes along or whatever happens, we have to keep looking at the goal, just like Jesus did, and we have to get there. And I don't know if it's brave or not, because a lot of times I'm anything but brave, but I'm trying to keep my eye on the goal so that in the end I will get what God has promised me. And that's what we have to do to get through life.
All right, Drew?
Actually, pretty much all of that, using David's story, the smooth stones and the abandoning of the armor, like not hiding behind excuses, not saying you don't have the tools or that you're not prepared. Like they're smooth stones, not even jagged stones. Like it wasn't just some misshaped arrowhead that he got to throw. Like it was a smooth stone. There wasn't no chance. Like not hiding behind those excuses and really kind of looking at the tools you have in front of you and being prepared to use those.
Yeah, I like that analogy. It's very good. It's very good. Any other thoughts on that? Oh, I'm sorry.
I think part of, for me, in terms of being brave going forward, is taking a stop to look back at all the times before when God has done something where, and I'm weird in that I like to try and remember where my mind space was at when I was in that difficulty where I thought, I don't know how this is going to turn out. Everything is how terrible it was in the moment. And then I look at it now and I'm like, what was I so worried about? Like, it's easy that once we're past it, it doesn't seem like it was as bad, but we forget how terrified we were in the moment.
Right.
So spending the time to do that, and then to be like, to be able to translate that now into the whatever I'm going through now. I'm like, you got me through that one, and that one, and that one, and no matter how bad that day was, not in that day anymore. Whatever
Right.
that situation was, not there now. To be able to use that to keep moving and to keep pushing to know that he can rescue me from all of those. So whatever's coming.
Right. No, that's a great point. Yeah. What he's done for us in the past, right? Just as David said, it's the same God, and he has the same objective to deliver us as well. And so that's a great point. Any other thoughts on this? Okay. I want to point out a couple verses. How much time do I have, Matt? Okay. Turn over to Revelation 21, just real quick. In Revelation 21, when he talks about he's making all things new, and you get down to verse 8, he says, "But for the cowardly and the unbelieving, the abominable and the murderers, the immoral person, the sorcerers, idolaters, and liars," it goes on, and for them, there's the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. And this, I don't say this to be discouraging. I say this to say, be brave. Go out and do what you need to do. This doesn't mean that you're not have some fear and trepidation around it, but it's this idea of understanding that God will deliver you. God is there, the one that's fighting. You go forth and do what you were supposed to do in serving him. He's going to take care of the bigger problems. And so in that way, too, we can learn to put more trust in the Lord. The other thing I'll put in there, too, is he's giving you what you need to get better. We get this in a physical sense, right? If you want to run a 5K, unless you're in terrific shape like Randy, you're not going to do that today. You're going to have to build up to that, right? But every journey starts with the first step. So he's going to give you the trials that you need now to build up the endurance to get to the next step, to get to the giants, right? So be brave. Go out and step out there. Is that 90 seconds, Matt? All right. Thank you all very much. We'll jump over to the next lesson in 1 Samuel 24 is where we'll pick up, Lord willing, tomorrow night.